Before we dive into this suspenseful story, please drop a comment with your city so we can see how far it reaches. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. A billionaire's party wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find a janitor standing in the spotlight. But that's exactly where Elijah found himself. It started as a joke, a cruel dare meant to humiliate him. The billionaire smirked, his words dripping with arrogance. If Elijah could play the piano, he'd marry him off in front of everyone. The room erupted in laughter, guests clinking their glasses, waiting for the spectacle of failure. A janitor in a tuxedoed world? To them, it was absurd. But as Elijah's hands hovered over the keys, silence began to stretch. What they didn't know was that this moment wasn't just about a piano. It was about dignity, survival, and the quiet power of proving wrong every person who had ever dismissed him. What happened next wasn't just music. It was a revelation. And the question burned. When the world mocks you, what do you do when it's finally your turn to answer? Elijah wasn't born into wealth, and he certainly wasn't raised for ballrooms. His life was made of long shifts, mopping floors and scrubbing marble that would never belong to him. He was the man people passed without notice, the one blending into the background while others laughed, drank, and celebrated under chandeliers that dripped with light. To the billionaire, Elijah was invisible, except when he wanted a joke. But beneath the uniform and calloused hands was a story no one cared to ask about. Elijah had grown up with music as his only escape. His mother's old upright piano had been battered, its keys chipped, its sound uneven, but to him, it was magic. Hours were spent pressing those worn keys, creating melodies that spoke what words could not. Still, dreams of playing were buried under bills, responsibilities, and survival. That's why, even at the grandest parties, with polished instruments gleaming in corners, Elijah stayed silent, sweeping past them as though they were ghosts of a life he could never claim until that night. When laughter turned toward him, when every eye demanded he fail, he realized this wasn't just another shift. Something far greater was about to unfold, though he didn't yet know just how heavy the cost of proving himself would be. The laughter hadn't fully died down when Elijah sat at the piano. Every second felt like an eternity. Guests leaned forward, drinks half raised, eager to watch him falter. The billionaire, smug and certain, crossed his arms, convinced the janitor would crumble under the weight of expectation. Elijah's hands trembled at first, not from lack of skill, but from the crushing memory of every time he had been reminded of his place. Stick to cleaning. People like you don't belong here. Their voices echoed in his head, feeding doubt. But then his fingers touched the keys, and everything changed. The first notes rang out, soft but sure, pulling the air taut like a string about to snap. The room stilled. His melody wasn't simple background music. It was confession, resistance, and triumph woven together. Each chord struck against the walls of prejudice surrounding him. The guests who had smirked began to shift uncomfortably, their laughter frozen. The billionaire's grin faltered. Still, Elijah knew this wasn't safety. Every note was a risk. If he stumbled, the humiliation would crush him beyond repair. Yet, as the music swelled, he remembered the years of hidden practice, the nights when his mother sat beside him, whispering that his gift was more than sound. It was strength. He played harder, faster, pouring decades of silence into a storm of sound. By the time the final note hovered in the air, the question wasn't whether he belonged, It was whether the room could handle the truth he had forced them to hear. The silence after Elijah's final note stretched on longer than anyone expected. No applause, no laughter, just the uncomfortable weight of truth pressing down on a room that had been so quick to mock him minutes earlier. One by one, eyes turned away. Not because they didn't believe in what they had heard, but because they did. And it unsettled them. Elijah didn't bow. He didn't wait for their approval. He stood, shoulders squared, and walked away from the piano with the quiet dignity of a man who had proven his worth without needing their permission. The billionaire tried to recover, muttering something under his breath, but his voice cracked against the weight of silence. He had lost the crowd. Worse, he had been exposed. Word of what happened that night didn't stay contained within those gilded walls. Guests whispered about it, then posted. Within hours, the clip of the janitor who played like a master spread across social media. Some called him a genius. Others framed it as an inspiring underdog story. But beneath the praise, Elijah knew the truth. Admiration didn't erase the cruelty he had endured. For every person celebrating him now, how many others would still cross the street when they saw him in his uniform? Elijah returned to work the next morning, mop in hand, the smell of polish in the air. Nothing had changed in the hallways. He was still the janitor. Yet inside, everything was different. He had claimed a piece of himself no one could ever take away again. He had forced people to confront their prejudice, if only for a moment. But the impact of that moment stretched far beyond him. For the young boy who watched the video online, sitting at a second-hand piano in a cramped apartment, it meant believing his gift could shine even if the world didn't recognize it yet. For the young girl in a school where her talents were overlooked, it meant knowing she wasn't invisible. Elijah's music had become more than sound. It had become testimony. And yet, the harder question lingered. Why did it take brilliance for people to see his humanity? Why did he have to bleed his soul into the keys just to be treated as more than the janitor? That, perhaps, was the most haunting part of all. Because for every Elijah who gets a fleeting moment of recognition, there are countless others whose gifts are buried beneath stereotypes, dismissed before they're even given a chance. Racism doesn't always come as slurs shouted in the streets. Sometimes it's quieter. A smirk, a dare, a belief that someone doesn't belong in spaces where brilliance is expected. Elijah shattered that illusion, but the system that created it still stands, and until that changes, stories like his will continue to play out, again and again. Elijah's story is not just his own. It is a mirror. It asks us to look at the ways we measure worth, the walls we build in our hearts, the key to limits we place on others before they've had the chance to show who they are. And so, the final question remains, not for Elijah, but for us. When brilliance rises from the places we least expect, will we recognize it? Or will we bury it beneath prejudice until another soul has to fight, bleed, and play their heart out, just to be seen? Because in the end, the music fades. But the silence of our choices, will echo far louder.